What is the best version of Windows? Of course, the answer is subjective, but a lot of people would probably say either Windows XP or Windows 7. For some people, it may just be out of nostalgia, but for a lot of people, they were genuinely good operating systems. Windows XP is quite iconic. Despite Microsoft ending security updates over 10 years ago, the OS still plays a role in the culture of the modern internet, with assets like the Windows XP sound effects, the Windows XP installation music, and the Bliss wallpaper being used all over the place. Likewise, many people see Windows 7 as the last good version of Windows, with some people still using it today. But one OS that tends to get overlooked is the one that came between XP and 7, Windows Vista, generally considered the worst version of Windows besides Windows Me. But was Windows Vista as bad as people make it out to be? Well, let's install it and find out. Our lab rat for today's experiment is this Dell Optiplex 7010, which features an Intel Core i5-3470, 16GB of RAM, a 240GB SSD, and an Nvidia Quadro FX 580. Which is not a particularly good graphics card, I'm just using it so I can record the screen with my capture card instead of pointing my camera at the monitor. I was just going to install Vista in a VM, but I didn't think it would be very interesting. So I flashed Vista onto a USB and installed it. Initially, I couldn't actually install Vista, but it turned out I was being an idiot and I booted the USB in UEFI mode rather than legacy BIOS mode. The installation process was fairly straightforward. It took 11 minutes in total, which isn't bad, but bear in mind this is quite a fast system by Vista standards, and if I was using an older system with a mechanical hard drive, it would probably take a lot longer. So while it installs, let's discuss why Vista was so unpopular. First of all, Vista is a lot more resource intensive than XP. Vista's minimum requirements consist of 1GB of RAM and 40GB of hard drive space. That doesn't sound like much nowadays, but XP's minimum requirements consisted of 64MB of RAM and 1.5GB of hard drive space. Of course, minimum requirements aren't always accurate and aren't recommended, but the point is, if you were an XP user who had, a Pentium 4 and 512MB of RAM, you wouldn't be in for a good time. The second reason is due to Vista's development. The OS that eventually became Vista went by the codename Longhorn, and let's just say Longhorn's development wasn't great, and development started all over again around 2004. This may be why Vista was quite unstable for a lot of people and had a lot of compatibility problems. And the third reason was because hating Vista was popular. Around this time, Apple made its iconic I'm a Mac and I'm a PC adverts, some of which poked fun at Vista in a bid to win users over. Once I installed Vista, I had to get some drivers installed. Since there were no compatible Ethernet drivers, I couldn't connect to the internet, so I had to download them on my main computer, put them on a USB flash drive, and then move them over to the other computer. However, this computer doesn't have any Vista drivers, which is strange considering it has drivers for XP. I tried the XP and 7 drivers, but neither of them worked, and to be honest, it's not a very good idea to connect an outdated OS to the internet. I'm only concerned about the graphics drivers, and thankfully Nvidia still have Vista drivers for this GPU on their website, and it worked perfectly. I was then able to get AeroGlass working. Now there are quite a lot of features in Vista that weren't present in XP. First is user account control, which is that prompt that comes up in Windows when you need to do something that requires admin permissions. The Ultimate and Enterprise editions also introduced BitLocker drive encryption. Vista also had a bunch of games. Some were just remakes of the XP games, while others were brand new like Chess Titans, Mahjong Titans, Purple Place and Inkball, which for some reason was removed in Windows 7. Windows Vista also introduced widgets, which were also present in Windows 7, and a bunch of new screensavers, some of which were removed from Windows 7 like Windows Energy and Aurora. In general, Vista looks and feels very similar to Windows 7, but there are some differences. I'm not going to get into all of them, but you can see how Vista has elements of XP. For instance, it uses the classic versions of WordPad and Microsoft Paint. If you ask me, the main limitation with older versions of Windows is Internet Explorer, which is literally unusable. So even if I had working Ethernet drivers, I still wouldn't be able to do much. However, there is a browser called Supermium, which is a Chromium fork designed to run the modern internet on older versions of Windows. I wanted to see if I could get some third-party software installed, And of course I had to do this on my main computer because no internet. I was going to try and edit this video on Vista, but decided it would be too much hassle. I use Krita as my photo editor, even though it's more like a digital art program, and older versions of the software run on Vista, and the experience is very similar to running a modern version of Krita. Out of curiosity, I tried getting Kdenlive running, but was unsuccessful, but it might be possible to get an older version of Shotcut running. And of course, there were also proprietary editors from the era. For example, when I was at school, we used a very old video editor called Serif Movie Plus. Like XP and 7, Vista came with Windows Movie Maker, but it's a bit too simple, and since optical media was still quite common back then, who can forget good old Windows DVD Maker? Anyway, I don't really know what the point of this video is, I just thought I'd revisit the OS of my early childhood. Obviously, I don't encourage anyone to use Vista in 2024, and it probably won't be that useful for most people, but I do have a soft spot for Vista. I think it looks very nice and it had a lot of potential. But until next time, cheerio.